far enough away from everyone up there, what? COVID's finished. You know that, right? Anyone still doing COVID tests? I've done one this morning. How socially responsible am I? I'm standing here and I've got COVID. Are you going to be sick?
I don't care.
You're still going to be sick?
I don't interact with anyone.
But I interact. I can be talking and probably spitting all over you and shit, you know. Not deliberately, not deliberately, obviously.
I was so ill with it. The only yeah, we had it on the same. Everyone got ill. Like 2 weeks ago. Everyone had his like I know Charlie had his tickets for like 11 days. Oh yeah. I have two.
I'm amazed there's 31 people. You people really want to get your money's worth for your tuition fees, don't you? Okay, so as normal, there'll be an email going out about 4:30 today for next week's seminar lecture. On Monday, or I might say, I'll do it on Monday, perhaps it'll get sent out on Tuesday. I'll just do a really quick reminder email of what you need to do for Thursday or before. But I'll verbally remind you now as well. Most important things that you do for the submission on Thursday are everyone must submit a cover sheet no matter what you have done for this assignment. A cover sheet has to go in. Now, I'm sure, please don't, okay, I can't ask people to show hands for this, but I'm sure there's somebody in this room in year one didn't submit a cover sheet for an assignment. I'm sure there's somebody in here who did that, right? There always is. Let me tell you why the cover sheet is important. Cover sheet has a declaration on it about the nature of the work that you've done. Now, according to the university's statutes, if you do not submit a cover sheet for an assignment, it cannot be marked. Okay? Now that's doubly important for this assignment because if you don't submit a cover sheet, I cannot give you an actual mark. I can obviously mark your work, but there's no way I can record that on the university systems unless you do this. Because it goes through Turnitin, we mark something via Turnitin. So what will actually happen when I mark your work here? Let's say you've done a video, Nikki, right? I'm going to watch the video, but I'm going to give you your mark and feedback via the cover sheet that you've submitted on Turnitin, and that's how you'll get that information. Okay? So if you don't do that part of the process, I literally can't give you a mark. Now, in terms of late submissions, the most important thing, I shouldn't be saying this in the recording, but fortunately nobody watches this shit anyway. In terms of late submissions, the most important thing is you get a cover sheet in. Okay? If your link to me came a little bit after 2 o'clock, okay, I'm not going to kick up a fuss about that, okay? It's not like I'm marking them from 2 o'clock on Thursday. I am actually going to start marking them on Tuesday the 11th of April, and it is my aim to get you your marks back by the Friday of that week. So I'm going to try and get them all done by then, because I know you will be working on assignment 2, and although it's not absolutely essential you have feedback on assignment 1 to complete that, it is useful and you know what you've had for the first part. So my aim is I'm going to switch the button, basically Turnitin is set up so we have like 3 weeks where we've got to get all your feedback in, and normally we just do all the marking and just wait for it to happen automatically. This time I'm going to rig it. As soon as I've marked the last one, I'm going to change the date of release to exactly that point in the day and time that I've done it at. So it'll automatically release at that point. I will send a message out via Canvas to let you know when that's happened. So that's prosaically what we need to do, all right? Make sure, no matter what you've done, you get a cover sheet in by 2 o'clock on Thursday. The late submission rules still apply. If you haven't done that by 2 o'clock on Thursday, the 0 mark will apply. Nothing I can do about it. You know, there's no use even asking me to do anything about it. That doubly goes, I know you should all know this by now, but for extenuating circumstances, if you do need them, please don't ask me. There is nothing I can do about it. Do you know who to ask about extenuating circumstances if you need them? Excellent. Doubly so, you may not know this, but you can go and talk to those people. They're on the ground floor of the Digital Technical Building. Just go in there and have a word with them. They will sit there and do the paperwork with you if necessary.
So we can just hand in the cover sheet like now and then send you the link on Thursday, right?
I would prefer if you do them more linked together than that. But so when you're ready to send one, send the other.
Okay.
Yeah. But in theory, you could do that. I have had once where somebody submitted a cover sheet and nothing came from them. There was literally nothing to mark. They never sent me a link to their work, and they didn't put the link on the cover sheet as well. So it was like, I was emailing frantically through the Easter holidays trying to get hold of this person who wasn't the best to begin with, in terms of communication, I mean. And I finally got it like 2.5 weeks after. They were fine. I didn't put a late thing on for them. But yeah, well, I'm not going to penalise them. They've done the work, they just literally forgotten to send. Jay? Are you sure? Yeah. Okay, so Monday seminars. I'm torn on this, so I'd like to know what you guys would prefer. Would you like a specific seminar about a topic in the module which you think is important? Would you like me to do a seminar on what I'm covering today, which I don't think is important to anyone's work, knowing what roughly you're all doing? Or would you like me just to do something around preparation for assignment 2? Yeah?
Yeah.
A bit more about assignment 2? Because I know I've been through it, obviously on Monday, but you feel that will be useful?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's what we'll do then. Alright, great. So on Monday I will do a bit more on assignment 2 for everyone. Okay? Lecture next week is about alternative social media. It is the last Friday before Easter. This has been an incredibly long term. I don't expect many people to be around. But I will be here, for those of you who need it. Another action point, please. I will put this in the email that goes out on Monday or Tuesday next week. Could you please take a note of this, though? On Monday, please do me a solid and complete the module evaluation, which can't be done today because it's not being released until Monday. Could you please all make sure that you do that? That goes for all your modules that you've done in Teaching Block 2. They all go live on Monday. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but that process is really, really important. To have feedback on modules and to be able to actually report back on what the feedback is on the module and what changes need to be made, what I need to do to change, what's going well, what you think isn't going well. I need to know all that stuff. Okay, so today, a very narrow focus of the lecture today. Protest and politics in social media. And the focus will largely be on, I guess, something which I kind of neglected a little. I don't want to say neglected, but not spoken about as much as other platforms, which is Twitter. So by a show of hands, who has a Twitter account? What are we talking, 80%? Okay. By a different show of hands, I don't mean use the different hand, you can use the same one if you want to. Has anyone taken part in what they would consider to be a political protest on Twitter? No? Okay. Has anyone taken part in what they consider to be a political protest on any kind of social media? Caring on you lot. So, do you mean to tell me that nobody in this room has tweeted about or made a post about Black Lives Matter, for example? Has anyone done that? Okay, so you've taken part in a political protest. Black Lives Matter is a political movement. And you have expressed, I'm assuming, solidarity with that political movement. I don't want to get into it if you're in solidarity with it, but has anyone expressed any support for a political party in a social media tweet or a social media post? Or slagged off a political figure? Oh, now we go. That is a political action. You are using social media to express a political view. That is politics in action. Has anyone supported or offered support by via of a like or a comment to somebody who commented about the Me Too movement? That's politics. Politics is not what we think it is. Political action is about engagement with, campaigns and engagement with ideas, be it in support of or in criticism of. But that is still a political engagement of different kinds. Now, structurally, what social media allows us to do is engage with all sorts of political ideas in new ways. We are all, at the moment, living in a democratic society. In this society. Prior to social media, our democratic rights could be expressed in a number of ways. There are formal ways of doing it, like voting in an election, for example. But there are also less formal ways of doing it, such as having conversations about political issues, where we are free and able to do that in a democratic society. Many societies around the world, you're not free and able to do that. But in this society, you are. Social media allows us to articulate our support for particular political stances in a new way. We can identify ourselves with a particular political movement or a set of ideas. We can give our support for it or our criticism against it, and we can connect with others who feel the same way about these issues, or, as many of us do, connect with others who are at the opposite end of that spectrum. One of the characteristic ways that we understand Twitter is as this rabid shit fight. where everyone is having a go at everyone about issues, and there is a massive polarisation of views in society, and Twitter is a contributory factor to this polarisation. Well, I'm not going to argue with any of that, that's largely true, but it is the platform itself that allows that to happen. Twitter mobilises people to express different views, and we ostensibly can go out and search for people who feel differently to us on a particular topic and have an argument with them. This characterises my entire Twitter use between 2016 and 2018 pretty much, when I basically became a trolling hunter going after Brexit supporters on Twitter for years. Until about 2018 I realised, do you know what, I'm really unhappy. This is an awful way to behave as a human being. I was literally, for years, offing people out on Twitter. One person indeed, like I said, I'll be in Swansea on Saturday afternoon to watch a football match. I'll meet you in Castle Square at this time, and I'll batter you. I'm not joking, and that will be documented somewhere, alright? That tweet exists. That person went very quiet. I'm not saying that I would have battered that person, they could have filled me in, I don't know, but they withdrew from the conversation when they realised, oh God, this guy's serious. So, that platform allowed me to articulate particular views and to express them in particular ways. Not necessarily in very positive ways, that much is certain. And a lot of the discourse that we have on, it's not just Twitter, I suppose, there are other services where we can do this, particularly Instagram has some interesting political dimensions as well. And indeed TikTok now. And TikTok's algorithm works very often to push alternative views at us in order to drive up engagement as well. So, it's well recognised across social media that social media platforms are sites of political discussion. And these can be most clearly seen very often in protest movements. Movements which deliberately set themselves up to create a groundswell of support for a particular view which is aiming for some kind of dynamic change in governance or dynamic change in the political structure of a nation or a set of people. So really that's what I want to look at today. Social media is a site of political protest. How does this work? And is this successful? Is this something we should engage with? Social media as a site of hegemonic struggle is perhaps more important again. Hegemonic struggle is really a term that's taken from Gramsci and developed by Stuart Hall. The idea that we have sites of hegemonic struggle through media. This is where ideas are debated and new hegemonies are formed. And in that concept, we can position social media as something that does, arguing political points on social media actually lead to demonstrable changes in society. Other things that we can point at and say, this is a social media movement which has led to actual changes in the social structure and political structure of places. I want to look at some different cases like Arab Spring, Occupy, Me Too, and Resist Trump. But before we even get into those, did anyone watch the football match on Channel 4 last night? No? I don't blame you, it wasn't very good. But England, well done to them, they beat Italy, which is a fairly good result for England, I would say. And in that game, Harry Kane scored a goal and he became England's all-time record goal scorer. Now, when I was a kid, about 10, England had a new record goal scorer. And I remember watching it on the news. I'm thinking I was about 11 or something like that. And that guy's name was, can anyone tell me who England's old record goal scorer used to be?
Shearer?
Fucking Shearer.
John Barnes.
Nowhere close. John Barnes?
Who was it?
Who's been in the news recently?
It was Gary Lineker, wasn't it?
It was Gary Lineker. Gary Lineker, formerly England's record goal scorer at football, and since his retirement in around 1992, has been a BBC presenter of football programmes. So, given that all of you are super engaged with media and many of you are journalism students, why was Gary Lineker across every front page of every newspaper for about a 2-week period in the last month? Jay?
He doesn't want to talk about something political. I don't know exactly what it is, but he doesn't want to comment on something.
He doesn't want to comment.
Oh,
No,
does
he did.
Oh, he did.
He did. He compared the government's immigration, like legal migration policy, like the language used in it that used by the Nazis.
Yeah. About 3 weeks ago, Gary Lineker tweeted that the language being used in the government's approach to dealing with people arriving in Britain via small boats, as they say, over the English Channel, that language the government was using was very similar to language used in the 1930s by the propaganda ministry of Nazi Germany to describe different groups in German society, in particular Jews. So those are the specific context that Gary Lineker said those comments. He was talking very specifically about language used. He wasn't saying that the government were Nazis. Very important. He never actually used the word Nazi. He said it was similar to language used in the 1930s in Germany. But the context was quite clear what he was trying to say there. So Lineker makes this tweet. Now, as a contextual way of understanding Gary Lineker's position on this, Gary Lineker has long been engaged in campaigns supporting refugees, and indeed refugees live in Gary Lineker's house. Lineker has made his house available to refugees as a sanctuary, and he has, I think, 2 refugees who've come through a legal means to refugee status in the UK that he houses in his own home. So this is a guy who's been a long-time supporter of this cause. Okay, so we have what Gary did. Can anyone tell me what happened to Gary?
I think BBC asked him to not present on Who's Match of the Day for a while. And
Indeed.
So everyone else was like, well, we're not going to present on it either.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, Match of the Day, the flagship BBC football programme, goes out on a Saturday night after the news. Gary Lineker is the host of that programme. And on that Saturday evening, just the week after his tweet, after an outcry by government and the right-wing press in this country, the BBC asked Gary Lineker to step back from presenting the show for a while. Lineker didn't want to do this, but he had been asked to do it. In support, everyone else who worked on that show also stepped back. This put the BBC in a very difficult position. BBC is supposed to be a politically neutral organisation, and what they were arguing here was basically that Lineker was not being politically neutral, even though he doesn't present anything about politics. He's a sports presenter. They thought they were doing the right thing, but unfortunately then they had to put out, instead of Match of the Day usually being about an hour and a quarter, it was 20 minutes. Because all the talking bits in between the matches, well, there was no one to talk, because everyone said, no, we're not doing it. Unsurprisingly, the BBC rolled over, and last Saturday night, Gary Lineker was back presenting Match of the Day again. Good for Gary. This is a victory for common sense. How does it relate to this stuff? Gary Lineker is making a political statement. He is engaging effectively in political protest. These are the policies of the UK government at this point in time, and Lineker is using Twitter to articulate a protest against those policies. Making that comparison of language used, and there's lots of evidence to suggest that his comparison there is actually accurate as well, but using that comparative form, he is engaging in a protest state. He's saying, right, what is happening here is wrong. However, his protest had direct world consequences for him. This is not just in the context of him being asked not to present a television programme. You know, you're waking up every morning with hundreds of newspaper reporters and television crews outside your house, waiting for comment. That's not very nice. He's trying to take the dog for a walk and he's being followed by camera crew. That's not great. He's being the source of conversation, not just in sport, but in politics. MPs, 36 Conservative MPs wrote to the BBC asking for him to be fired. This is politicians asking for a public broadcaster to remove a football presenter. You know, you always say, oh, you should keep politics out of sport. Well, actually, you know, sport out of politics is the better way of doing it. You know, politicians can. I don't ask politicians how to set up a formation of a football team. I assume they don't know. Right? Leave football to those people who actually go. It became very, very large, this incident. Now, I got diffused, and I don't think anything was really going to come of this. It was a bit of a storm in a teacup, right? What it illustrates is how effective platforms like Twitter can be in terms of articulating protest points. Here's somebody who wanted, you know, now if I had made exactly the same tweet as Gary Lineker, I've said very similar things to what Lineker has said on Twitter over the years about this government. Am I going to get fired? Yeah. No, I'm not. Because nobody gives a shit. I've got like 2,000 followers on Twitter. Nobody cares. I'm a nobody, right? I don't have a position. You know, somebody might say, well, you shouldn't be teaching young people because you have political ideas. You shouldn't be breathing oxygen because you're a fucking moron. Okay, of course I have political ideas, but you don't have to agree with them. I'm not trying to, you know, make you into political subjects. Wouldn't want to do that. Nobody gives a shit about me. But Lineker's a public figure. And because of that, he becomes a lightning rod, not just for people to complain about him, but of course, the important thing we need to note here is there was a lot of support for his stance as well. Many, many people said, well, I'm not going to do this, this, and this because of the way the BBC have acted. A huge number of people, and a big trend became, don't pay the TV licence fee anymore. You know, if the BBC is going to say what people can and can't say on Twitter, well, I'm not going to pay for it anymore. Let's see how long that lasts for. It became a bigger thing than the original actual event and the original actual tweet itself. What it points to is that social media is a legitimate site of political protest. You know, people do pay attention to what is said and done on social media as political protest. In wider culture and in the wider political sphere, those things are important. They're incredibly important. Politicians use Twitter to communicate with voters. No greater example of that than the former, thankfully, 45th President of the United States, who basically ran an entire successful election campaign on Twitter because none of the mainstream media in the United States would engage with him. Spoiler alert, well, it's not spoiler now, is it, because it's in the past, but the mainstream media were damn right not to engage with him, but unfortunately Twitter, you know, plugged a massive gap, and Trump was able to mobilize a huge amount of support on Twitter in order to, you know, enact his election campaign. So these things are going on. Back in 2008, Barack Obama's successful campaign to be the President of the United States was characterized as the first social media presidential campaign. I'm not actually sure that's entirely true, but I understand why it's said. Obama was the first person to actually realize that social media could make a big difference when it came to politics, to mobilizing the vote, and to getting ideas across in a novel way. Now, social media is the main domain of political campaigning. There isn't a political campaign that isn't infested with social media content. People will do things specifically for social media. Political parties and politicians and candidates employ teams of people to manage social media for them, to get their message across, to manage responses. You know, politicians, if you look at a politician's tweets, you'll often see they reply. They're not doing that. They have a team of people doing that for them, for engagement with voters, to try and improve their prospects of being elected or re-elected or whatever it is. So it's a recognised form of political discourse, social media. But within it, we can see some very interesting things. How do we conceptualise this? Well, we conceptualise it in terms of Jenkins's idea of participatory culture. You know, the main, I've been talked about this before, but the main conceptual idea here for Web 2.0 is that media is spreadable, and consumers play an active role in spreading content. Consumers in this model are grassroots advocates for materials which are personally, socially meaningful to them. How does this apply to political ideas? Well, if we adopt Jenkins' framework here, we can understand that the reason why politicians and political causes use social media is to try and enroll other people into the spreading of those ideas themselves. Through the mechanisms that social media give us, you know, on Twitter, for example, the like, the retweet, we are actively spreading that message. What Jenkins perhaps view doesn't take into account is how we can actively be involved in changing the message as well. I retweet a lot of politicians, but I comment. So I'm using their tweet, but I'm giving my own commentary about it, which is usually about how this person has the intelligence of a single cell organism or something like that. Or, you know, this person should be burned. With some sort of chemical, but you know, but I use different chemicals or something, so I like to mix it up, you know. But you know, but some kind of chemical damage is needed. That's just me. Other people retweet nicely. You know. Other people use constructive criticism instead of wishing, you know, that their skin boil off their body. I think my way's more effective, but what are you going to do? Jenkins' idea here acts as a basic framework for us to work with. That political ideas and politicians utilise social media because this is a uniquely fast way of enrolling people into campaigns and ideas. And there's a particular feature of social media which is potent for this, and we use this word quite often to describe behaviours on social media, or maybe not behaviours so much, but things which happen on social media. We say something has gone, begins with a V.
Viral.
Very good. Something has gone viral. It's the virality of social media which is important here. The recognition that something can go from no likes to 10,000 likes in a matter of minutes, depending on who are the gatekeepers for that information, how many people it reaches, etc. That you can very quickly gain traction for ideas on social media in a way that other media simply doesn't allow you to do. You know, if you're having an interview with a newspaper, well, that's great, good on you, you know, that's fantastic. When's it coming out? 3 days, 4 days, maybe. Not exactly speedy, right? But a tweet can go super viral, super quick. You can get tens of thousands of engagements with it within a matter of minutes. It is a recognition that the speed of politics has increased alongside the speed of media itself. So, definitely the use of social media as a site for political protest in the ways that, you know, Gary Lineker and others use it, that would fit with Jenkins' notion of participatory culture. If that idea wasn't, I have been through all the holes in participatory culture in previous lectures, I'm not going to dwell on it here. You know when you've beaten somebody, I don't know, you guys probably don't get into fights and what have you, right? But when I was, years ago, when I was a kid, and you're in a fight with somebody, at some point you have to stop, yeah? Because when they're down on the floor and like crying and what have you, you can't keep on kicking them. That's just not nice, right? It's okay, before that, faults on both sides. But at that point, you've got to say, no, I've got to walk away now, right? And this is the same with Henry Jenkins. I've got to stop kicking the guy. I've been doing it for years. I've just got to leave him now, all right? And Henry, you just carry on with your life, son. We can use some ideas from network theory to understand this. Now, what ideas can we use to articulate the nature of political protest? Well, networks allow for people with the same ideas that are distanced by space and time to cooperate and coordinate in real time. The very notion of how political protest occurs on social media is completely different to political protest in the past. For example, if you want to do an actual in-person protest about a particular issue, what do you need to do? Let me just take it back. Has anyone ever been to like a march or a protest against something? There's a few people here. Okay, good. What do you have to do? What kind of plan? Make sure everyone's going to be there. It's going to take a while with you, Nick, so you're on the right lines. So, how do you do that? How do you make a plan that everyone's going to be there? What have you got to do, sort of prosaically, to do this?
You're going to use social media to aggregate people.
Forget social media for a minute. Think that social media doesn't exist for a second.
Communicate through, like, just word of mouth.
Communicate through word of mouth. What have you got to communicate? What are the things that have to be communicated?
Like the reason for doing this, what's actually happening.
You've got to give some foundational basis for it, right? You've got to give some context. Yeah. What else do you need to do? Thank you. You could tell people when and where it's going to be. You're going to meet somewhere. Right? So if you go to a protest in Castle Square in Swansea, right? You've got to tell people we're going to be in Castle Square in Swansea. And they'll say, right, now I know. But of course, if that's all you tell them, you know, Nick's there 8 o'clock in the morning and I just wander along at 10 o'clock, Nick's not there. So you've got to tell them the time that we're all going to meet as well. You've got to coordinate things, right? You've got to have a proximal and temporal coordination of this stuff going on. You can imagine at 10 o'clock in the morning we're all meeting in Castle Square, but we forgot to tell this person where it was. He's down the leisure centre. You know, he's throwing bricks through the windows of the leisure centre thinking this is where the protest is. No, mate. Wrong place. By the way, if anyone would like to see me in a protest, there was a film released in the late 2000s called Swansea Love Story, made by the Vice company, you know, Vice News. It's about heroin addicts in Swansea. Now, I'm not a heroin addict, though I ever have been, right? So I just want to make that clear. But part of that film covers a demonstration in Swansea when members of what's called the English Defence League, or EDL, were having a march in Swansea. And when it pans to the people who are protesting against them, you can see me quite clearly at the front of that protest going like that. So, my small claim to fame, and I think the only film I've ever been in, is that. Right? So I do know a little bit about protests. And how not to behave very well. So, previously you would have to coordinate physically and temporally in order to create a protest. Yeah? You have to be together at the same time, in the same place, which is why political protests traditionally have been in large cities. Easier for people to get to, more people there in the first instance anyway, easier for people to travel to than to smaller cities, usually larger spaces for people to actually coordinate this kind of action as well. And when you do still get large-scale in-person protests, they do tend to be in larger cities, which can facilitate that kind of meeting. Now, social media gets rid of that. In order to protest, if we want to support Black Lives Matter, I don't have to go somewhere at a particular time. I can write a post with a hashtag. I'm registering myself as part of a community of protesters expressing an opinion in support of this campaign, right? So I'm being facilitated to get outside the spatial and temporal constraints of protest. I can articulate my protest behaviour in a new way that doesn't involve me having to go somewhere, doesn't involve me having to be in that somewhere at a really specific time to join in with other people. Instead, now, I can use a platform to say, right, I'm on this. I don't have to do one tweet, I can do 10, I can do 100. I can keep doing it all day. I can search for a hashtag and retweet every post that's made for hours and hours and hours on end, spreading from one place and spreading that out to all my followers, right? I'm engaged with that protest community at that point in time. Therefore, what we find is that people can now get engaged with campaigns which previously would not have been their focus of interest. We see campaigns now operating on a global level rather than on a local level. Something like Me Too, for example, wasn't localized to the United States. It became a campaign all across the world. Whereas previously it might have been localized only to perhaps the United States or the UK. You saw women all across the world joining in that campaign. Now, there are inherent dangers in doing this, though. Using proprietary platforms to do this kind of behaviour. What are those dangers? What is dangerous about using Twitter, for example, to protest?
Easier to like stop. You can like ban accounts.
Your life, your career, you just have only one name.
Yeah, I mean, there's Twitter controls the visibility of that thing, so you can shut it down. It's not necessarily dangerous, but I think it's a very good point. I think Carol's point is getting closer to what I mean. You know, if you protest against a particular issue, even if your name's not attached to that account, you're putting yourself in a position of danger. You know, what if, usually we think of this in terms of negative consequence, right? So let's say, you know, we've got the hashtag #MeToo, and somebody's set up an account to troll people who tweet #MeToo, yeah, and give those people abuse. We know that people do this because this happens during the #MeToo movement, it happened. Millions of people were doing it. Twitter has the tools to hand over your identity. You might think, oh, I've just set up an email account, you know, it's fairly anonymous and that. No, Twitter knows, like, you know, the IP address that you tweeted from. Twitter knows the MAC address of the device that you're using in order to make those tweets. It knows all that stuff. It can identify you very, very quickly. So, those people who felt empowered perhaps to tweet, you know, rape threats at women who were tweeting in the Me Too movement, putting themselves in direct danger of losing jobs, homes, families, etc. Now, I have absolutely zero fucking sympathy at all. But we can see that if you don't live in perhaps a democratic society where protest against the government in that society could be punished in a very punitive way, this could be a very dangerous platform to use. You know, because Twitter does deal with governments. Twitter does deal and operate under particular legal structures. They may not be fair, but they are legal. And therefore, if a legal structure of a country says Twitter must hand over any and all personal information about anyone who tweets negative things about this government in this country, Twitter will do that. It is the law that they're complying with. We may not agree with it, and we may think it's very unjust. I'm sure people in Twitter think it's incredibly unjust. Doesn't mean they're not going to do it. They operate in countries, they operate to their laws, whether those laws are fair or not otherwise. And because of that, this can be, when we get into certain types of protest, using social media can actually be a really, really dangerous thing for people to do. Let's talk about a specific event. The reason why I talk about the Arab Spring, I know it's 12 years ago now. It's still an important historical event, though, and it's important in terms of social media because of this. It is the first major protest movement that was described as a Twitter revolution. This is a description of a set of political events which were given the context. This revolution happened on Twitter. Therefore, it's a really, really important one. Now, 2011, how old are you guys? 20?
20.
Okay, so you were 8. I don't expect you guys to know this stuff. When you were 8, there was a year of revolutions, riots, and it was all kicking off, basically. Indeed, in Britain, it kicked off big time. Obviously I'm speaking to people who don't remember this, but half of London was on fire at one point in 2011 as we had huge riots in the capital. It's like, what? Yeah, it's only 12 years ago. Kicking off big time. Some idiot in Swansea, I'm not making this up, right, set up a Facebook group to say, let's have a riot like they had in London, in Swansea. Again, why is it always Castle Square? Meet in Castle Square, and like 3 people turned up, and there was like 400 police waiting for them, and they arrested them. Fucking clowns. And this happened in Swansea, it happened in Cardiff, I knew it happened in Newport as well. It happened in a few places. But there was another group in Cardiff who were a bit more successful because they decided not to meet in the middle of the city, but like out in an industrial site somewhere. And then they trashed a couple of light industrial units and then went home apparently. Well, at least they got something done. At least they got some frustration. So 2011 was a fairly fractious year. The world was coming out of a major global recession. As economies started to pick up in 2011, the living conditions of people generally around the world were not reflecting that economic upturn. So we had the Great Depression of 2008. Countries were starting to recover economically by 2011. So you started to see some indicators that things were changing economically. But people's conditions around the world were still fairly grim in terms of how they were living and, monetary conditions in which they had to exist in. This led to the emergence of various social movements at this time about revolutionary change. So, those people who've written about it since, Alain Badiou, the French sociologist for one, 2011 was the year of the rebirth of history, a year in which people tried to change history by their protest. And what Badiou means by this is that there's been lots of popular protest movements in history, but this was an attempt to try and do this by a different means. To try and utilise, for the first time really, to utilise media in protest. Media in the broadcast era couldn't be utilised in this way. People did not have access to that media to publish newspapers, or to make television programmes, or make movies. Those are controlled by particular interests. But social media operates in a different way. People were able to interact with it and spread the word and create. It was the year that YouTube became a platform for political protest in itself. People started to make content specifically about this kind of thing to circumnavigate the traditional gatekeepers in the popular media. Now, for Zizek, year 2011 was a year of dreaming dangerously, the year in which people dared to try and make dreams of a different world a reality by utilising social media platforms to articulate that different world, to try and say that this can change. And because of that, 2011 is a really important year in the history of social media, because it is the year where this idea that political protest can change the world via social media started to stick. That we started to point to examples saying, yes, look at the role social media has had in this political change. Social media caused this to happen. Therefore, when we use the term Twitter revolution, what we're literally saying is that revolution would not have been able to happen were it not for the presence of Twitter. Twitter was fundamental to that event. In 2011 was a year when dreams of a different world were put into political practice, where the reality of millions and millions of people having access to social media tools became something that governments had to respond to. Now, the riots in the UK really took part in a different time. Now, when I look back at it, 2011. I'm not sure anyone will know what I'm talking about when I say this. This gets more tenuous year on year, right? Now, by show of hands, does anyone know what a BlackBerry is? Really? You used to have one? Those really shitty phones with the full keyboard. Mm-hmm. And you guys all had one, but you know what they are.
Yeah.
Okay. The riots in London were characterised as the Blackberry riots.
Is it because they use BBM?
Exactly right. Most of the coordination of those events took place over BBM. Now, what was interesting at the time is that very few communication networks were end-to-end encrypted. But BBM was one. BBM was one of the first messaging services that actually utilised end-to-end encryption for messages, which meant that the police and government couldn't actually see what people were messaging to one another. Very, very safe way of communicating information. So, you have lots of young people in London coordinating riotous actions where basically every night of the week they were meeting up to trash shops, steal loads of stuff, and burn the shops down afterwards. Good times. That's all I'm going to say. I was down to them. Unfortunately, I was like 30, so I couldn't do it myself. But if I'd been 10 years younger, I would have been doing exactly that. Now, government couldn't get into BBM. How did the British government and the Metropolitan Police respond to this? How do you think?
Didn't they ask BlackBerry to like have access to it?
They did.
After engaging in the access.
No. BlackBerry didn't really want to give them access. So there's another way to stop this from happening. They shut it down. BBN was shut down. The entire network was turned off. You could no longer use it. In Britain, BBN was shut off completely. Stopped people being able to communicate in any way, shape or form on that piece of technology. It basically hastened the end of BlackBerry phones, although they were already on their way out, because anything that had a keyboard by that point was looking a bit shit compared to the iPhone and other Samsung models. But actually, when the only competitive advantage that they had was taken away from them, by the middle of next year, BlackBerry were virtually bankrupt. It's like nobody was buying their phones anymore. British government decided, no more of this. Since then, the British government has been involved in a long and tortuous legal battle with a company now known as Meta, but its predecessor, Facebook, and its predecessor to that, WhatsApp, before WhatsApp was bought by them, about taking out end-to-end encryption on WhatsApp as well. With vague threats that WhatsApp could be shut down in the UK, which it's not going to be. But this is still an ongoing theme, this idea of end-to-end encryption being used for political protest and how can we stop it as governments. The big difference being BlackBerry was a small company. Facebook could buy and sell the British government tomorrow if it wanted to, so it's not going to mess with it. Anyway, what we have in 2011 is platforms like in the UK, BBN, but platforms like Twitter and Facebook being used directly to articulate a vision to other people that things can be changed. And that what we need to do to change them is this, this, and this. And millions of people around the world join in these campaigns in order to support and enact political change in this way. Now, we've encountered Manuel Castells before in this module. For Castells, who analysed the role of social media in the revolutions that were taking place in 2011 in Egypt and Tunisia. So this was part of what's known as the Arab Spring. For Castells, the Arab uprisings were spontaneous processes of mobilisation that emerged from calls from the internet and wireless communication networks. For Castells, those protest movements, those revolutionary movements, were born out of social media. Social media created, fostered, and articulated revolutionary movements in these countries, which were then mobilised onto the streets. Without the social media element, there is no mobilisation. For Castells. This is Manuel Castells saying, this would not have happened without these services. Now, in the context of the Occupy movement, again, I kind of feel bad asking these questions for people who were only kids at the time, but does anyone know what I mean by the Occupy movement?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, well?
I remember the name. There was a few different ones, but I remember the one I remember the most was Occupy Wall Street,
Indeed.
where a bunch of protesters essentially descended onto Wall Street in New York and basically camped out there for as long as they could to protest.
For years.
Yeah.
For years and years, actually. Now, if you've been to New York City, you might have been to Wall Street, perhaps. I don't know. And at the bottom end of Wall Street, right opposite the New York Stock Exchange, there's a park. And Occupy Wall Street was basically, in 2008, a group of protesters coordinated via social media to meet at that park and establish like a commune at the park to protest in front of the New York Stock Exchange. That went on for years. They were there for, I think, 5 years. I think they finally packed up Occupy New York in 2013. I think.
I think
It was Occupy London, which was in the grounds of St Paul's Cathedral.
I can't remember if Occupy New York packed up or whether they were forcibly removed in the end. But
6 on one, half dozen on the other.
yeah,
I don't know
probably.
if they were. Yeah, they might have made it look voluntary, but they might have been. There might have been a bulldozer on the way as well. So the Occupy movement had various sites across the world. There was a big one in Sydney in Australia. There's a few other cities around the world which had Occupy as well, quite Toronto. The Occupy movement was born of the internet, diffused by the internet, and maintained its presence on the internet. The Occupy movement, if you like, was the first hashtag protest movement. Literally, Occupy was a hashtag, and people responded to the hashtag on Twitter, and that hashtag allowed people to coalesce around the ideas of making this into a material protest in different places. But from those centres of material protest then, that movement was carried on through their Twitter presence, through their Instagram presence in 2010 onwards, etc., the Facebook groups, and all this kind of thing. So for Castells, the internet and its bastard child social media created these movements. Let's take 5 minutes, and then I will come back to why he's wrong, which is always fun.
There's gonna be speech. I'm gonna go to the side. I'm pretty busy right now, so.